I'm curious from your perspective what you see as some of the success stories on this issue of governance and what can be learned from those countries that have sort of succeeded in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an incredibly important question because the role of governance in addressing climate change is absolutely critical. We heard a number of our speakers who work every day with the private sector on these issues say multiple times, you know, the private sector has an important role to play, but it can't play the critical role that government has to play. And it's what you said, you know, it's creating the enabling environment for the right type of private sector investment. It's creating the policy and regulatory environment to limit and guide how development occurs, so that it occurs in a way that is low carbon and enhances people's and the economy's resilience to climate change. Some of the ways that works best that I've seen, and I've been so impressed in working with governments around the world, both at the city level, at the national level, and at the regional level, is when governments work to strengthen their relationships with all of the key stakeholders that are contributing to and vulnerable to climate change. So those include civil society, you know, the communities that are being affected by climate impacts. They include the private sector, which is also very affected by and vulnerable to impacts from climate change. And the private sector also has a critical role to play in designing its investments in the economy, in businesses, in ways that enhance the resilience of the country or the local communities in climate change. You know, I've been most impressed by governments who realize the importance of serving as kind of a convening entity, their role as a convening entity to bring civil society and the private sector together with the public sector to really design a collaborative plan for how they will reduce climate vulnerabilities and direct and align their investments toward climate resilient development and low emissions development.
You know, I think that in some places that's going to be a lot easier than in other places. Certainly a lot of the sort of least developed countries are where they are in part because of conflicts and really a lack of good governance, a high level of corruption, not true like democratic institutions. And so what do you do in places like that? Can you achieve some of these governance successes around climate in places like that? Because, you know, I think increasingly it's about how do we have a really inclusive discussion about climate change that's including everyone from, you know, the giants like the United States and China to, you know, small island nations who are also a part of this discussion.
Right. Exactly. I think absolutely. You know, there is a tremendous opportunity to make progress in every country, in every community, regardless of where they are in their governance, you know, capacity at the time. But you are absolutely right that every development partner that's working with that country has got to focus on strengthening the capacity of governance to do that. In some countries, like you mentioned, where there may not be strong governance capacity, but for example, private sector investments are really the driving force for whether the country becomes more resilient to climate impacts or less resilient to climate impacts. In those situations, it's important to make the business and the economic case for taking strategic climate adaptation and mitigation actions. And there is a case to be made there. You know, whether a country reduces its vulnerabilities to climate change has a direct effect on the resilience of the economy, on value chains in the market. You know, and so those things can be quantified. You know, the ability of ecosystems to provide clean water, clean air, reduce coastal erosion, you know, reduce flooding, those things can be quantified. And when we quantify those in monetary ways, that helps make the business and the economic case to align private sector investments toward low carbon, climate resilient development.